April 13th, 2015 meeting of the Rutherford County Regional Planning Commission. If you would stand with us, please. Commissioner Jim Averwater will lead us in our prayer and our pledge. Jim.
Please bow your heads with me. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for this opportunity to meet here again tonight to discuss our county's business. We ask you to give us wisdom and be thoughtful in all that we do tonight. We ask you to watch over our soldiers overseas, particularly give comfort, guidance, and strength to the families of those who have paid the ultimate price for our country. In your name we pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. Call the roll, please, Gail.
Rhonda Allen. Jim Averwater. Veronica Buchanan. Will Jordan. Mike Cush. Craig Lynch. Chip Pinion. Charlotte P. Steve Sandlin. Mike Vaught. Jeff Phillips. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Gail. This time we need to approve the March 23 meeting minutes. I'll call on our Vice Chair, Mike Cush.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have reviewed the minutes of last meeting from the
I have a motion and a second to approve. All those in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. And motion carries. Thank you. No items withdrawn or deferred. Thank goodness, since we only have one.
It's an awfully short agenda if we did.
Item 6 is our rezoning request that's scheduled for public hearings. Item 6A, amendments to the zoning ordinance concerning retreats. The item number is 15-5001. Our planning staff is the applicant. Doug?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and good evening, Commissioners. These regulations that you have before you will look very familiar. This is the same draft that we discussed at our last meeting, really with the biggest change being the number of events. In way of kind of recapping how we got to where we are, you'll recall that staff brought these amendments to you originally a few months back due to the fact that we're starting to see more and more event venues, if you will, a lot of them for weddings and events such as that in the unincorporated county area. A lot of these venues are being located in existing barn structures, or maybe people are buying property in order to construct such a facility like that. The ordinance, as it's currently written, really just deals with these kind of events in an agritourism fashion. In other words, if they're on property that is being farmed, it's considered agritourism, therefore is a use by right. However, more and more of these are being located on property that's not being used for agricultural purposes, has no agricultural zoning or anything like that. And I will say that this is not something that we're dealing with just ourselves. This is something that's really becoming more and more of a national trend as far as more and more people looking to do events and weddings and things like that in these type of venues as opposed to maybe churches and things like that. So we wanted to kind of get ahead of things. We've already dealt with a few of these, and we realized that the regulations we had really weren't functioning as we would hope they would. So what you have before you is the final draft. It's the April 13, 2015 draft for tonight. Of course, if there are the changes that need to be made, that this is an appropriate place to do that. But just to kind of go over these just briefly, you'll see that we are classifying these as minimal impact facilities, which are permitted by special exception in all zones except the mobile home park, the light and heavy industrial zones where they're not permitted. A special exception means they have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for what's essentially a special use permit. Probably some other nomenclature you'd be familiar with would be what we used to call a conditional use permit. The old type 2 is really what a special exception is now. You see we have the definition of a retreat there. We've kind of beefed that up just a little bit. I won't read the whole thing, but you see that right there. We added some language in there, though, about retreats on property that meet the state and local definitions of agriculture are exempt from this definition. You'll recall a lot of the discussion we had due to some of the state law changes and what's considered entertainment, what's allowed in agricultural areas. We wanted to make sure that these regulations weren't confused with those type of event venues. We did specifically exclude some of the categories in our zoning ordinance. Example, uses approved with a temporary use permit, which could be outdoor performances, seasonal attraction, those kind of things. Anything classified as transient accommodations, which could be hotel rooms, motels, things like that. And then anything that we'd classify in our entertainment and amusement services. An application for a retreat would include all those items. We would ask for them to include all that so we have an idea to take to the Board of Zoning Appeals so they have more information for them. Again, I won't go through all that, but you can see all the different information we were asking for. The real, I think, meat of the ordinance really gets back to the general standards under number 2. We would propose a minimum acreage of 5 acres. You recall, we think we started out with a little bit more than that. But after discussion, we decided to settle on the 5 acres as opposed to some of the other ones we were looking at. Maximum number of events, this was something else that we discussed. During any calendar year would be 30. Applications for more than 30 events would need to seek rezoning approval to the Planning Commission and ultimately Board of Commissioners as a planned unit development using the process in Chapter 9 and these standards in this subsection. Parcels have to have an unobstructed frontage along a public road consistent with the requirements of the zoning ordinance. We would not allow access drives on private easements to access the property. Site plan approval would be required consistent with Section 1404C. Maximum floor area, we talked about this a little bit too, for all the areas used in connection with the retreat shall be no greater than 5% of the total lot area. That's similar to what we use for accessory structures as well. Accessory uses can include, but are not limited to, banquet facilities, recreational amenities, as long as they're not open to the general public. Another item that probably got really got more of the discussion than some of the others, although I don't think the most, but overnight accommodations. Now, some of these event venues out there have the ability to have like a little cottage or something like that, and they let some of the people stay in the cottages. We did, to help with we didn't want to see a situation where somebody was basically using it as a hotel motel, which is why we excluded transient accommodations for one. But we wanted to make sure that any lodging on the property was going to be was not a standalone use and was not open to the general public, and the maximum length of stay for any guest was 7 consecutive days per singular event. Uses, the next section deals with uses abiding by the parking requirements. Parking would not have to be of a hard dustless surface necessarily, but it would have to be approved by the planning and engineering staff. If an agreement could not be reached, the Board of Zoning Appeals would have the authority to determine that. Events would have to conform to the performance standards in our zoning ordinance dealing with noise, vibration, sound and noise, lighting, and the same thing. Signage would have to comply with Chapter 12. Any structures used in connection with the retreat would have to comply with all adopted building and fire codes for Rutherford County and should be inspected prior to certificate of occupancy. We realize that there may be some existing buildings out there that may require variances from the Board of Zoning Appeals. A good example of that, if there was like an old barn on a piece of property and somebody wanted to fix it up and use it for an event venue, even though it's not used for agricultural purposes anymore, a lot of the times when barns are constructed for agricultural purposes, they're exempt from zoning regulations. So they're allowed to be built pretty close to the property line, closer than what we would normally allow for something like this. So we realize that, but they would have to ask for a variance along with their Board of Zoning Appeal application for the special exception. This next one's kind of a catch-all as far as other regulations. All regulations enforced through other agencies, be they federal, state, or other local authorities, have to be met. This could include but not be limited to building codes, again, fire codes, health department regulations, groundwater protection, etc. If the retreat is proposed on property with an existing structure or residence, an additional address may have to be assigned for the retreat for 911 purposes. That just allows, if somebody has a large piece of property and they have a house on there, and then the barn may be a few hundred feet away and it's got the event and there's an emergency at the event venue, when the ambulance gets a phone call, they're going to show up at the house and they're not going to show up at the event venue. Now, it may only take them a few seconds to get over there, but in emergencies, every second counts. So we require them to get a separate address. Probably another one of the items that got quite a bit of discussion was the setbacks for building activities. After a lot of discussion, we finally decided to go with a kind of a tiered system, depending on the type of buffer that was being provided. If they're providing a type 1 buffer or equivalent using existing plantings, they would have to provide 100-foot setbacks for all the structures used in association with that. If providing a type 2 buffer, we would drop that down to 75, and a type 3 buffer, we'd drop that down to 50. They could use existing plantings. They would have to be shown on the site plan. We would do credits for those existing plantings based on the zoning ordinance and requirements there. And the parking areas would be allowed to be within the required setbacks, but not within the required buffer yards. So the structures themselves and the venues would have to be in the setback, outside the setbacks, but the parking could be within, which is consistent with what we typically do with commercial and industrial type development. And then finally, we would require contact information for the owner-manager to be provided for a contact person for each event. That way, but be posted on the premises in case there's a need, they would be able to do that. And then you see what we're proposing for parking requirements. So that's just kind of an overview of the regulations. Again, we have had a lot of discussion. Of course, since this is an ordinance amendment, we do have to bring it forward for a public hearing at the Planning Commission and of the County Commission. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Doug, the parking area wouldn't be considered part of the, let's see, where was it at, over on E, part of that 5% total area?
No, sir, no.
Okay.
That floor area is counting buildings.
And then
not
the
parking.
dustless, with that decision on that, I mean, it's either out in the field or it's in a gravel area. So, I
Right.
mean, not necessarily would have to be paved or concrete or anything like that.
That's
but
correct.
the handicap, what I understand, needs to be a more of approved area.
That is correct.
So-
And further down, right, and further
Gotcha.
down on H.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and it does, I didn't mention that, but you're right. Handicap parking would be required to be hard dustless surface and would have to meet ADA standards. That's correct.
Doug, we defined retreat, but we didn't define event. And I'm just wondering if we need to, because I'm thinking, let's say I want to have my rehearsal dinner out there, and then I want to have my wedding out there. Well, in my mind, it's one wedding. But are we counting that as two events? I don't know.
Well, we were talking about a wedding. Say that I didn't hear part of it. The wedding and
The
what was
wedding, I said,
other?
yeah, if we do it for the rehearsal dinner, and then we go back out there the next night and have a wedding,
Yeah.
in my mind, that's one event, but this may count it as two.
Right. I'm kind of on the same lines with you. I mean, if it's booked for 2 nights by the same folks, I would consider that one event. I wouldn't consider the rehearsal dinner and then the wedding necessarily 2 separate things. And then the reception after that, I wouldn't say that's 3 different events. I would try to say that's all one, kind of encased in one event. But, I guess we could define that. Yeah.
I'm just curious if it'd be helpful.
We can certainly do that.
The police powers come back to the board, to the Building and Codes Department.
Correct.
As far as the number of events and taking out the permits and all that sort of stuff. But it would come through planning as far as the
use is
criteria and
concerned.
everything,
Right.
the use.
Yeah, as far as the use is concerned, it would have to come through the Board of Zoning Appeals, or if they wanted more events, it would have to go through the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners. But yeah, as far as the building permits and codes and things like that, yes, that would still be the Building Codes Department, Fire Department, and whatever other organizations need to take a look at that.
Again, I've only had 2 comments since we've had this talked about in the past couple meetings. So we're in the middle of a standardization of trying to get something down on the books.
Correct.
And so we're going to come across things that's going to have to be tweaked.
That's correct.
So this right here is a good run-of-the-mill guidelines for something of this nature that's becoming more and more popular throughout the nation. So your department's looked at a lot of different ordinances and stuff, and we've got a collage of all of those right here.
Yes, sir, we do. And by no means are we being the most strict either. Some of the minimum acreages we looked at were 15, 20 acres. Some of the setbacks we were looking at were 150, 200 feet. So we're scaling it back some, to fit. It's really difficult to take an existing ordinance and just say, okay, we're going to start using this because it was tailored for another municipality or county. So, yeah, but we've looked at several different ordinances for this.
Doug, for our own good and the folks that may be listening at home, define what existing retreats have to do at this point. Are they grandfathered in at some point? Do they have to get a license? Do they all have to report to?
Right. Now, if they were legally established and approved prior to these regulations taking effect, then they would be grandfathered. That means they received zoning approval, their codes approvals, whatever. They went through the process. They would be able to continue on as grandfathered uses. If there are some out there that did not get previous approval. They just kind of opened up one day, or maybe over the course of time, it just kind of evolved. I mean, that's typically what we see is somebody, puts a barn, gets a barn, fixes it up. Next thing you know, hey, I'm going to have some friends over, and then their friends want to have their friends, and then next thing you know, they're booking events, several months ahead of time. So in those situations, if they did not have prior approval, either by the Board of Zoning Appeals generally or by the Planning Commission for some reason under the old code, then they would not be grandfathered. They would have to come in under these ordinances, these new amendments that we're proposing. If they have less than 30 or less, let's see how I worded that. They could have up to 30 events. If they had more than that, then they would have to go to the Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners. So the first 30, they can go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. But once they start wanting to have more events than that, then that's when they have to go to the Planning Commission and Commissioners.
Doug, if they say they don't meet the 5 acres, but they can't go to BZA, could BZA grant something under 5 acres?
They can grant variances to that, yes, sir. I mean, that'd have to be part of the application that they're asking for a variance to that provision. Of course, the applicant would have to meet those standards for granting a variance, and that would be up to the board's discretion at that point.
So any of these that BZA could change?
Yes, sir, I believe. And, we kind of allude to that even with the existing structures. If somebody has a barn and they fix it up, but it's only like 2 feet from the property line, then they would have to ask for a variance to that provision, regarding the setbacks for all the different buildings and what type of landscape screening they're using. They'd have to ask for a variance to that.
Doug, just for clarification, since Will Jordan's not here, Will owns some property and nice house, swimming pool, goes to a big church, and people ask to use his house and his property to conduct weddings, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 of them a year. Does that fall under this?
Well, a lot of, and there are several situations out there where someone just may let someone use their property once or twice, in a year for family or something like that to get married. Those type of situations I'm not as concerned about. Now, if it starts getting more than that, or anybody can just use the facility, there's a line in there. We'd have to take each one case by case. Generally speaking, though, if it's just an occasional use and someone just says, hey, you got a beautiful piece of property, I want to use your barn, it's for a family member kind of a thing, and they just want to get married out there, we've run into that before. That's not really what we're trying to limit here. It's when the friends and their friends and then people you don't even know start wanting to use the facility and things like that.
Wouldn't, whether it's for profit or not for profit or whether they charge, come into play there too, Doug, on that part?
Well, the way we don't really get into the compensation part of it, the definition we have says a facility owned and operated by a non-governmental entity for the purpose of providing a rural setting in which temporary lodging, camping, and or conferences, meeting, event facilities are provided with or without compensation. So it doesn't really matter to me if it's for or not for profit. It's going to have
And
the
the
same
reason
impact.
I was thinking about it, somebody asked Will and they want to use Will's house, and a couple of times, it happens a couple of times a year, Will's probably not charging anybody.
Yeah, and so it doesn't, as far as I'm concerned, it really doesn't matter in that regard.
Questions for staff? We're ready for our public hearing. This time, declare our public hearing open for item number 15-5001, amendments to our zoning ordinance concerning retreats. Anyone wishing to speak, come forward, state your name and address, please. Up here, yeah. Tell her your name, please.
Chairman and members of the Planning Commission, I appreciate your having this meeting and letting the people speak that this concerns them. I realize that this is a problem not only here but all over Tennessee and the country. So if you will, I'd just like to read a short statement that I prepared telling what problems I've had. I live in the southwest corner of Wilson County, right on the Rutherford County-Wilson County line. And I appreciate what you're doing in getting some rules and regulations in place for this kind of activity. I have a personal interest in this area and hoping to get Wilson County to adopt something similar. 2.5 years ago, a farm was leased in my community to a corporation that started a wedding venue and cabin rental operation. 4 cabins and a house plus a bunkhouse are rented out on a nightly or weekly basis. No approvals were received or arrangements were made for the use of this A1R1 property with the Wilson County government. After complaints from my neighbors and myself about the traffic, noise, dust, and congestion, Wilson County inspected the property and determined it was in violation of Wilson County zoning ordinances and told the operators to close down and to apply to the Board of Zoning Appeals. They did not close down, but continued to operate as usual, including taking reservations for future events. After more complaints from my neighbors and myself, the venue did apply to Wilson County Board of Appeals. Their appeal was denied. They continued to operate as usual. This operation did not have any road frontage. They used a prescriptive easement across my neighbor and my property. The easement is part of my driveway. Wilson County sued the landowner and the operator for zoning violations, and my neighbors and myself sued the landowner and operator for using a prescriptive easement that has always been used as an ingress-egress to a single-family home, as an entrance to a commercial business, and also as being a general nuisance to the neighborhood. The trial date is August 11th in Wilson County Circuit Court. Within the month after the suit was filed, the landowner bought property on Couchville Pike in Rutherford County and put in a driveway to the venue from Rutherford County. Now the venue operator claims that they are in Rutherford County. The county line does run through their property. They still use the prescriptive easement across our property whenever they choose, but claim that Wilson County has no jurisdiction. We hope to get this cleared up August the 11th. My neighbors and I have put up with this for over 2 years. We have not been able to have friends over for a cookout because of congestion, noise, and traffic. We can't open our windows on a cool summer night for the dust. There have been up to 3 weddings a week, April through November, plus all the traffic to the rental property throughout the year. 5 acres is not enough property to contain an operation like this. I live 1/2 mile from the wedding venue, and my neighbor lives right next to it. The noise is unbelievable. Some weddings have professional disc jockeys. They bring in sound systems on trucks. The bass vibrates the walls and windows of my house. When operators who don't care what harm they are doing to their neighbors or pay attention to the lax ordinances that are in place, then put an operation in a rural neighborhood, then I would hope that you will adapt rules and regulations that will ensure the rights of surrounding property owners. That's the end of my statement. If you have any information on this operation, you can be found on duckpondfarm.com. Thank you very much.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Lanham?
How large is the parcel that they're using, and how much land is between them and you? You said 5 acres wasn't enough, so I'm curious, how large is their parcel of land, and then how much land is between them and you?
Their parcel of property, they own 120 acres, the entire farm, but I'm not sure how much that the corporation leased from the landowner. I'm not sure of that. I'm not privy to that. They don't speak to me. But I'm about a 1/2 mile there's a half a mile of property between my house and their property, or the venue, and then my neighbor's house is between me and the venue. He's right up next to their property. But the driveway goes up my driveway, across my neighbor's, and to the venue. And they have put in a driveway from Rutherford County, and but they still use my driveway whenever it suits them, or they get washed out or heavy rain or something. They still use my property, so they still have a prescriptive easement.
Thank you, Mr. Lennon.
My voice breaks because this is a very important situation. My name is Diana Lanham, and I live at 1960 Cartwright Road in Mount.
Lanham, could you pull that microphone down a little bit? Thank you.
Thank you for trying to get some rules and regulations for these types of facilities. I have watched 2 of your last meetings. We have been dealing with this problem since the fall of 2012. So far, the only rule that we know that they have followed was getting a business license in Wilson County. I have been told they now have a business license in Rutherford County, so they're coming. The first thing that you are suggesting is a minimum 5 acres. That will not contain the outside music because everyone wants it to be as loud as they can get it. Who will decide what's too loud? Right now, we can't use our property for having to listen to someone else's music when an event is going on. If we are inside, we feel it vibrate. Second, it was stated that if someone invested $100,000 into a facility, they would want to have more than 25 events. Now you've moved it up to 30. You're right. The one we are dealing with wants something going every day. They rent out 3 cabins, a chalet, a bunkhouse, and a house all year long. We as homeowners have invested more than $100,000 in our homes and property. We have invested our lives. How much can you rent out per night before you have to have a motel hotel license? Then there is traffic. A wedding is a 2 or 3 day event. You have people coming and going all that time. If 100 people are invited to the wedding, there will be at least 70 cars. How do I know? Because I have watched traffic go through my property for the last 2 years. If noise and traffic is not enough, then property values go down. No one wants to live next to something like this. The one we are dealing with now wants to use the Farm Act to operate. This legislation requires any activity must be in conjunction with and secondary to the farm production. How are weddings a farm production? I hope you will think about more than the ones wanting to do a business. Their neighbors deserve to enjoy their property. Also, once one gets started, you can't stop it overnight. The one we are dealing with were told to stop operation August of 2013. They are still going strong and getting larger. They started in Wilson County using ingress-egress through our property. So we have put up with the noise, traffic, plus dust since we are on a 1-lane gravel driveway for 2 years. Since filing a lawsuit, they now have an outlet on a Rutherford County road. For 2015, they will operate stating the Farm Act like they did in 2014. Even though they have no farming operation and that they are now in Rutherford County, even though everything they have done has been through Wilson County. Wilson County also has a lawsuit against them. I could stand up here and talk about the things that we have endured ever since the fall of 2012 for hours. When they first opened up, they came to our house and told us that they had done everything that they needed to do to start operations. What they had done was get a business license and register their name so that no one else could have that same name in the facility for Wilson County or the state of Tennessee. Then they went to the Zoning Appeals Board and was denied because they did not have 50 feet of road frontage. At that time, they shunned us because we spoke up against. After that, they would go up and down the road and create just as much dust as they could. So we've been dealing with it for a long time, and I hope you will really stop and think about the neighbors. Yes, we're out in the country, but the city is coming to us, and we would like to be able to enjoy our property as much as they want to have a business. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mrs. Lanham. Anyone else wish to speak?
My wife and I have recently got involved in this venture that kind of has evolved into something. As Doug was speaking a while ago, we live on Creekview Drive, which backs up to Brinkley, and we purchased some land behind our house when there was an existing barn there. The barn was not in great shape, and we went through the right channels to get building permits to go in and just clean it up and make it into a hobby barn. And as we went along, people drew interest in it. I don't know, some of y'all may have seen it, right on Brinkley Road. But so we started having more and more interest in it. We, as it proceeded, we had a family member at our church that asked about having a reception there, a wedding reception after. And it was all gratis. We weren't compensated for it. We let them allow it to have it. It went great. Everybody had fun. They posted on their Facebook page, and before we knew it, we started getting more and more inquiries about it. With no prior intentions of doing this, it's just kind of evolved into, as Doug said, it's just kind of evolving in different areas. So at that point, we had our neighbors ask us about having a Boy Scout group there. No problem, 30 boys and our right next door neighbor. And they were excited about what was going on. We took, the land was kind of nasty looking. We got it cleaned up, and we've done some landscaping and so forth out there. So that happened. The next time we had a father-daughter banquet that somebody called us about, some friends of ours, and we said, hey, that sounds good, yeah. They wanted to have a little dance. Our church called us and asked us about having a barn dance out there for the women's group to have a barn dance. They had probably 50 women or so there. They had a great time, had no issues on that. So then we just kind of, we said, well, maybe we need to, step it up a little bit and, make it look a little bit better. And so we just kind of evolved on it, landscape a little bit more, and, continue to dress it up. The next thing we did, I told Melanie, said, hey, I need to probably get set up a checking account for it. So we go up to our banker, set up a separate checking account. We didn't want to get confused with what else we had going on. She set up a checking account, and the banker said, hey, you may have a business license. You have to have a business license before she could set up an account. And I guess that's a law. She calls up to find out about getting a business license, and they said, well, if it's on your own property, you have an event there, you don't have to have a business license. So there's a loophole there, something that's going on there. Somebody needs to investigate that. That's the information that was given back to us. She said, you can do anything we want. So our banker went ahead and set up a checking account on it. Again, we weren't planning on making this thing evolve into anything what it's become. We were just, friends of friends and family members and church friends and things like that. And we've lived in this community for 30 years. I own a business. I've been in business here for 30 years and do work all over the Middle Tennessee area and bring revenue back to this county. And we just saw an opportunity. Here's an old barn. Let's fix it up. Let's make it a little nostalgic. We've tore down some old barns for other people. We've taken the materials and brought them together. And you're welcome to come and look at it anytime if you want to. But we're going to just use it for family, whatever we have to do. But our concern is we're really kind of stuck in there right now on Brinkley. We're not in the country there anymore. We're right there stuck between the city. So we have a lot of groups from people in Berkshire. We have people in our neighborhood that are inquiring that want to use it for small events. We're not trying to get large on that. So I came back and I said, well, Doug, what do I need to do? What procedure do I need to progress. So I came up and I met with them, and they said go to the BZA. Well, I went totally unprepared. I just went up and just told them what we're doing, basically like I'm telling you. And before I knew it, I was just blindsided by what was going on, and I didn't realize this thing had gotten so large, and until hearing about what was taking place, and you guys are trying to adopt something. But our property, what we have 2.5 acres right behind our house. We're on a very busy road now. Brinkley Road is no longer really county anymore. It's really, I mean, you got all that Blackman School, traffic coming through there. Not to mention, by the way, we've had Blackman School, the ROTC group wanted to have a little banquet for their honors banquet. Miss Justice, the principal, called us about having a event over there, small event. So people are looking for small little venues like that. It doesn't have to be grandest. It can be something small. They're not available out there, not reasonable. Our churches are packed. They're not embracing a lot of these activities because they're inundated. They've gotten so large. So there's really a need there. It's almost basically, we're almost like a small little community center. And I guess people just don't have a place to go. We don't put on those kind of events ourselves all the time. So we usually do stuff around our home. I didn't realize there was such a need there. I was just blindsided by it. So there are inquiries there for small events. I think that if there's some way you can limit the number of people, so how I'm sure there's ratios and so forth you come. I don't think that land, 5 acres is going to, I don't know why 5 acres is the magic number, or 10 acres, why acreage has anything to do with it. If you have a building size and you need to accommodate parking, or you have off-site parking, what's wrong with using off-site parking? We had people say, well, we're going to shuttle our people in. We're going to bring them in. We're going to bring them, shuttle them in. So there's opportunities for that too. So I think there's a little bit more, we need to look at it a little bit further other than just saying, hey, if you've got this much acreage, you're able to do it. That footprint could be much smaller if it's utilized correctly and you make other accommodations for traffic. So I think there's some more thought that could even go into that. Again, there's a need there. I didn't realize it was there. Believe me, I did not do this. We had no intentions I don't need any more headaches. I run a business already, but we built this, and we had, we redid it mainly for our family and just hang out and do some things. But again, we've had some inquiries. I've had, I don't want to turn away some of our church group. We've had a deacons meeting there, from our churchmen have come and had a ball there, had a blast. We had about 40 guys there. So I just need to get that, understand what, like you said, what is an event, or what is just having a get together. So what qualifies and what doesn't qualify? Because certainly we have no intentions of wanting to be bad neighbors or not being, good citizens and so forth. That's not by any means. We want to understand this a little bit clearer. How do you define those events? Is that 150 people, 200 people? How long does it last? Most of these events, if you have something, 2 hours and they're out of there. That's it. Most people are not going to hang around there. Now, if you're going to get into some elaborate party, it's going to be different. You're going to have people spend. But most of these little events, now I don't know what these folks have experienced out there, but if we've had anything over there at all, 2 hours and they're gone, and we're usually the ones left to clean up after them. But that's typically what we've seen. So I just think there's a little bit more. It needs to be defined a little bit more, and there's some more consideration for some of these other little venues like that. Because, even if you go out to the county, if I go out to Las Casas and I see they're using an old fire hall or whatever they're using for a pancake cookout, or, all these other little places. You go out to Almaville and you go out here and they have little auctions, thing. Why is that any different than what a little small, event, a little venue like we're talking about, something like that? So, there's some other ones that exist out there. They're people have just taken them and modified them for different purposes. But that's all I have to say. Just something else. Some other considerations, some thoughts to put towards that. Yes, ma'am.
The perfect example of what we're anticipating. I just have a few questions.
Like I said, I was.
So what do you do about restroom facilities?
We have restrooms in there. So when we were building this along, and we used our electrician and our plumber guy said, if you're going to do this, you might as well do it right and do it all ADA. So I said, what? And we have older family members, and so, yeah, okay, let's do it. My father's older. They're going to come over. My wife's family, she's got 5 aunts that live in this community, and so we have a lot of family in the area. So we went ahead and made it all handicap accessible. Everybody was on there. We've got, 2 bathrooms. And,
2. Okay.
Yeah, 2 bathrooms. We've got women's bathroom, men's bathroom. So we went ahead and made it ADA. And,
What do you do about parking?
but right now, our parking, that's going to be, that's a concern because, again, we didn't know what, we put some gravel out there, and what happened was we had a company party there. I had my guys come to a company party, and we held it at the barn over there. And I never dreamed I was going to have that many guys there. They brought their family, all their family members coming. And so I said, man, if we're going to have anything out here, we got to have some more gravel out here. We got to do something because they were getting stuck and stuff. I said, this ain't going to work. So I had some access to some gravel. I said, let's just gravel some more of that. This is our backyard, and this is kind of our back. It's kind of a little bit different because it's really our back of our house. It's our backyard. And so we just, put some gravel there. So we set it up for, I didn't really set up, I don't even know what the parking would be. I haven't done a schematic to say what. But, you could get probably 40 cars there. But I think if we ever do anything else, if it's going to have anything at all, we're going to have to do it, do some remote parking and bring some. We're a mile from Blackman School or something. There's something that could be done there that we need to look at.
But do people access that parking through your driveway?
No. I'm sorry. No, it's on the back of our house faces Creekview, and then the rear entrance faces Brinkley.
From that standpoint, for them, it feels like a standalone venue. It's not like they're coming to your house
Absolutely.
and then going to your backyard.
Yeah, because I'm a landscape contractor. I've buffered it and landscaped it out over the years, and it's I've got.
About how many events do you think you've had?
I probably had about. We've had family things, but we've probably hosted 7 or 8. Maybe.
I would say non-family things, like church, Boy Scouts.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
people.
Probably, from October, probably 10, maybe. We had our Christmas party, our family Christmas thing too. We had one church have a Christmas party out there. So, but we're always getting inquiries about stuff, and we're like, we don't want all that. It's like I like the idea of the 30. I kind of like the idea because, that way. I think it's a good idea to have a number.
Part of the reason that I ask is I'm just wondering, have you had any complaints from your neighbors?
Well, here's what happened was my next door neighbors on all sides, love it, great, and that's what I was worried about. I'm like, great, that's good, everything's going good. And then when I came to the BZA, the guys across the street came to the meeting. I'm like, wow, I didn't even think about going over and talking to them. They just didn't know what was going on. They didn't even know I lived behind there, and I take full responsibility for that. As soon as I left this meeting, I went over and personally pulled up in their driveway and apologized to them. I'm really sorry I didn't come over and at least, introduce myself or anything like that as to what I was doing. And come to know it, we know so many other people together. And I said, if you guys had walked across the street and said you had a concern, I would have been more than happy to listen to it. Because we were out there in and out all the time, and I'd have been glad to have answered any questions. So it really was not the right forum at the time. But
have you had a chance to look over this amendment or the ordinance?
No, I have not.
Okay.
I've heard little bits and pieces of it. But
yeah, I'd love for you to take a look at that and just see what beyond the land, because acreage is pretty much what you've talked about. If you were to apply everything else to you and to your situation,
I don't have a problem with that.
Would it work?
Yeah.
Or if it wouldn't, what parts of it wouldn't work?
What I heard y'all say a while ago sounded pretty, it sounded good to me. I didn't really say anything. It's just, why do you use acreage? And again, parking's going to be something. Do you use remote parking? How do you do it? Time limits on when those events have to be over, and those type of things, or whatever your activity is, that type of thing. To me, would make a lot of sense to do that. But I think y'all have done your due diligence on a lot of that. Yeah.
I had a couple of questions. You sound like you got pretty involved with the restroom facilities and everything like that. And so ADA, that's pretty serious.
Right.
That you did, the right thing up front, So heated and cooled.
Well, what we did, we don't cool it. We didn't cool it. We got plenty of fans. We fan everybody. We did heat it. We have just one big gas heater, and it's it's controlled by thermostat. It's just, a gas, wet gas there. So just ran the gas.
I see. So
Just like a big.
this thing would have outside catering and would have.
Yeah, what we
I mean,
what
you're
we
not
were going to do is.
like. Are you cooking on the facility?
No,
or are you
we're
doing
not
it?
going to cook on the. I mean, we do have a little kitchen. It's a kitchenette, really, basically what it is, where you could heat things up for that. But anything that anybody that's had any food, they've all brought everything in. There has been two times that people have brought in, like the vans where they serve off of that. I think Martin's Barbecue came down from Nolensville, and then another caterer or somebody out of Nashville came in, and they had their trucks. They come in, which is kind of cool. They had it all set up, and I mean they can do a gourmet meal working out of that thing. So yeah, that's another thing to take into consideration. But we do have a little kitchenette in there. We'll use it for ourselves and stuff. If somebody needs warm stuff, which really basically what they've used more than anything is just the refrigerators.
You're approved through the BZA at this point.
I went through the BZA.
Oh, okay.
I applied for that.
Yeah, he did not get they denied the application at the BZA.
We were denied, exactly. Right. But again, it goes back to, I don't know if I did a good job of presenting it on that. I think I need to go back and reevaluate what we need to do. You know, I plan on trying to meet back up with them. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, that's fine. It's not the end of the world for me. But, you know, I just think that there's a need there. Do you tone it down a little bit more on those type of things? Absolutely. I mean, the thing about it is you know, another thing I'm seeing, even a small wedding, a wedding, I mean, you know, I want to encourage these people to stay active on, I mean, it's a great event for people. I mean, people have, and to see people continue to, I mean, churches can't accommodate all of them, you know. I mean, we alluded to churches a minute ago. I guess they're not able to accommodate all, or they don't want to. I mean, some churches say, we'll do our members, we won't do anybody else, you know, those type of things. Well, what kind of, so I get there's actually a need there. Again, anything we've done, I mean, ours have been gratis. You know, they've been people we knew on that. Now, we've had inquiries on others, you know, now we're trying to, you know, face that, trying to determine where we're going to go from there. But
I have a question, and I'm sorry I missed your name.
yeah, it's William. I go by Butch Hamby.
What's the last name?
Hamby, Hamby.
I'm going to make an assumption, which is always dangerous. You mentioned Boy Scouts, a wedding or two, church groups, father-daughter banquet. My concern from day one, and these people's concern, has been the noise. Part of the reason 5 acres is, and you're right, it's a number we agreed on, but is part of the sound issue. Would it be realistic to put sound restrictions on something less than 5 acres? As, in other words, no DJ? You could have, on a wedding, you could have a harpist and a violin, but that's it?
Yeah, I think that, control the music. Okay, here's what we've done. This is what we've done. We put, it's called a Sonos system. It works off your iPhone. We got total control over all the sound. If we're over our house and we think it's going to be, all we can do, we can cut it right off on them. I mean, we've got total control over that. So they can't just run rogue on that. We have the ability to do that. But yeah, I do think on that, you know, any kind of time we've had music on the inside, we keep the doors closed. We tell them you have to keep the doors closed, and we insulated everything. We over-insulate them for that particular, you know, I don't want to be.
I understand. You may be an exception to the rule, though, as far
Well,
as.
I agree. I totally agree. You're right. I mean, other people could care, you know. I mean, I've lived on that same street for 20 some odd years now, and, you know, I have a great relationship with all those. And like I say, I mean, and one neighbor next door, the other neighbor on the other side had their little kennel club, had a little meeting over there to get together. I mean, 15 or 20 people, you know, I don't know. We did grab it. They were neighbors. We said, hey, yeah, come out, have at it. But we did it. I mean, it's really cool. We like it. It's fun. We want other people to enjoy that, you know, on that. That was our purpose, was not necessarily, we didn't want another business. We've already got plenty of other things to handle. But I don't want to not have the ability, if we want to have some type of function there, that we need to understand how that's classified. Is it what we call an event, or what is just, if you're just having a function there, if it's a group. So, you know, I think it kind of needs to be delineated a little bit, those two.
part about the noise control I was going to bring. I believe your sound amplification's all inside your building there, is it not?
Sound?
Uh-huh.
Yes, sir.
It's all inside. I know these folks back here had a real problem with it, and I'm like, the idea that I don't know how we're going to control that. That's one big problem. 50 acres, if it's a big sound system like these people were talking about, 50 acres won't you still hear across that.
It echoes throughout.
Oh, it does.
So it's really a whole lot of different. I mean, I don't even know if acreage even.
Well, in our zoning ordinance, to answer your question, we do have performance standards that limit the decibels that can be heard at from the property line and everything like that. That's what we use as far as that's concerned for that. So that's how we're proposing to regulate that in these regulations, just by using our existing performance standards in our zoning ordinance. But I agree. I mean, not only is it just the noise issue, Mr. Cush, that you were talking about, but also just the parking in general. If you have too small of a property, we're going to park all these people. Now, I know you talked about maybe off-site shuttling from back and forth. There are regulations in the zoning ordinance that deal with off-site parking, but I think it's with 300 feet or something like that. I don't have it right. I don't off the top of my head. But, I mean, driving a mile away to an existing parking lot, assuming you can get permission to use that parking lot, is a whole other issue. And is that something we really want to encourage on a smaller piece of property? Plus, in the county, the smaller the property, you're dealing more with septic soils. If you start graveling over your septic soils, you have a problem. So you can't use that for parking area. That has to be used, has to be left alone. So, or, even, gravel, pavement, whatever, you start getting into that situation. So I think several reasons why we looked at a larger acreage as opposed to just saying we're just open it up for anybody to do this. Next thing you know, somebody's calling and wanting to do something out of their house. It's maybe 20,000 square feet of land area. I don't think that's really appropriate in that type of situation.
Too is that, in my mind, I'm thinking if you're going to limit to 30 events a year, say, if that's going to be, and you've limited that, it's not like you're open 7 days a week doing activities over there. It's typically, if it's a Saturday, it's usually 2 o'clock, by 6:30, 7 o'clock, it's pretty much over unless there's, unless you have something that's going to go on and start at 6 and go to, 10 o'clock or something like that. But it isn't like it's 7 days a week. It's like Saturday or maybe a little something on Friday night on that. It's not 7 days a week. So in my mind, I'm saying, well, I don't know how that really affects your septic because you may have a big push on it for that shortened period of time, but the rest of the time of the week, it's resting on that. So and then again, if the off-site thing to me would be an option on that. If you think you're going to have more vehicles on that, then you're going to have to make accommodations. And that's something you would have to spell it out with whoever's hosting that event or whatever it's going to be. You're going to say, look, we're limited to this many parking spots, and this is our limited number of people that we can have there too. If you're going to exceed that, then you need to go somewhere else because we can't accommodate that. I don't think that's unreasonable at all. I do it in every other facility. You see occupancy signs up there, what they'll allow, so forth. So I don't see why that'd be any different. Again, we see a need. These people are inquiring. It's another way of creating community within our group. We talk about community within our groups of people. If we're going to allow that to have community there, then where are they going to go? Where are they going to get together and visit? Where are they going to get together and bond with each other and chit-chat and those kind of things? And, if your home's not large enough, and again, these aren't all inside the building. Some of this stuff, you can have people meandering outside. We live in groups. People will gather here, they'll gather here, they'll gather here, and that's kind of what I kind of watch when people have been in our place. It's kind of like little boutiques. You got people who are going to meet over here, and you got another little group, and they're all separating out. That's what makes I think our place is kind of unique because of that reason on that. But again, regulating the number of people and the parking and what it'll accommodate and that type of thing, to me, is probably not unreasonable to do that. I think it's certainly something that needs to be done. But again, there's a need and there's a want, and somehow that needs to come together on that. Unless you have another alternative, where are you going to send these people?
Anyone else? Seeing no one, I'll declare the public hearing closed. Any other comments or questions for staff? If not, need a motion.
I have a couple of comments here. Doug, I came into this thinking staff had written the perfect thing, but after hearing these three very good presentations that brought up some very valid points, suddenly I have some more questions that I just want to at least think about it and make sure that we have. The first one's going to be, we're restricting it to 30 events, and if somebody gets this thing growing where they have the opportunity to do more than 30 events, then they're only going to take the largest events. And if we have the floor area set at 5% of the total area, that would mean a 5-acre piece of property would allow an 11,300 square foot building. And in my mind, that's going to be an awful big event. The second thing, I guess, is the noise. And I know that we have noise regulations, but are we going to have a county person out there at 10 o'clock on Saturday night with their decibel meter measuring the noise and writing citations? We'll get the complaint on Monday morning, but it may be too late. The other one is hours of operation. We may have addressed that already, but if these things go too late and the noise is too late, I mean, what method do we have to shut it down other than post somebody out there? So I guess those are my three concerns.
Well,
as
far as your first concern, I'll try to address them. I believe that was the 5%. And I agree that could be a large building on the property. Again, we used a number that was consistent with our existing regulations as far as detached accessory structures go. You recall, originally we were looking at a maximum, I think it was 20,000 square feet, if I remember right. It was just kind of a cap. It didn't matter if you had 5 acres, 50 acres, 500 acres. So we changed it to that to allow larger properties to have more structures, or a larger structure if they desired. So that's why we did that. Now, your second point is, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm trying to remember the second point. What was your second question? The noise. To answer your question, are we going to have somebody out there at 10 o'clock every single event they have? Probably not. Now, it does give us something to enforce if we do get complaints about it. If we have a facility out there that's operating, they keep it quiet, they're under wraps, no real issues, probably isn't any reason to have anybody out there. But if we constantly get complaints from neighbors saying they're out there, they're very loud, we would have the ability at that point to send somebody out there during an event and, let's do a noise meter check. And at that point, we could take enforcement actions against them if they are breaking that. So that's how I think we propose to handle that. You're right. We're not going to have somebody out there every single event at these. Now, your third issue, I think, had to deal with the hours of operation. We looked at that. There were some of the ordinances that did have that. I believe there were some others that didn't. We decided to steer away from that. Again, a lot of it's just enforcement, really, is what it boils down to it. Are we going to be out there, driving by at 11, 12 o'clock at night to make sure that somebody's done? Probably not. So what we proposed to do in lieu of that was to, in their application, we wanted them to specify that. Say the application for the retreat says, we want to know the expected number of events, maximum number of people at these events, the number of employees, hours of operation. We asked for that. We didn't put necessarily any standards in here regulating it, but the board does need to know that, or the planning commission does need to know that kind of information. Because if they are coming to you and saying, okay, we're looking, especially with a plan development type application, if they're deciding to go with more events, if they come to you with a plan development and say, okay, we're going to be open from 10 o'clock to 8 o'clock, we'll just throw numbers out there, then they're bound by that, in a plan development application. The Board of Zoning Appeals could even have the ability to and they have the ability to place reasonable conditions upon special exceptions, they could even look at that and say, well, you're kind of in a residential, residences are closer to you than maybe some of these others. We'd be more comfortable if you stopped at 8 o'clock as opposed to 10. I mean, they can put reasonable conditions on there like that. So we stayed away from just dictating exactly what hours you had to operate on more, in lieu of more of a case-by-case basis is how we handled that.
Doug, to address that, would it be helpful if we just said no amplification after a certain time? I mean, they could still be there, they can still do, but I mean,
yeah,
it's basically unplugged.
That could be something. No amplification past 8 o'clock. I mean, just throwing a number out there.
11 or is a reason.
Right, just something like that. Yeah, I mean that could very easily be added.
When can Mr. Hamby come back to BZA?
Well, he's time barred for his existing application. Now, if we come up with new regulations, he can go back, he can ask under the new regulations because he wouldn't be asking for the same thing at that point. He was asking for a temporary use permit originally as kind of a stopgap measure, knowing that we were working on these. But if we pass some new regulations, he could come under those.
He could come back and try to address as many of these and at BZA.
Correct. Or depending on the number of
like
events
the size
he wants.
of the
Right,
lot.
yeah, we'd work with him at that point as far as the number of events he's requesting, as to which direction it would go.
Ready for a motion?
I was just going to make one statement. Your police power is usually your surrounding neighbors. That is your police power, your best police power, too. A lot of events that, such as this or whatever, they have in the good ones, and maybe these folks that had the bad one beside them, doesn't, or I don't know, but most of these events have a contract, and that when you sign a contract with XYZ company or bed and breakfast or event, whatever, that all of this is stated in their contract, that the music's over at 11 or the party's over at 12 or whatever it is, and they sell this through the planning department or through the cities that they're in so they can do business. That's the problem. Not everybody pertains to that. Not everybody works in that sort of fashion. So, the events that I've been at or been a part of, they were really strict about that. The party's over at whatever that time that is, the wedding party's got to go. The music stops and it's got to go. And they've signed a contract stating they understand this, the people that have actually paid for that event. So I guess that's part of the problem. Not everybody is that way. And but it's clear when they do it that way, and that way they're not upset about when they've got to leave and when the music stops and DJ's got to go home and everything like that. It's when it continues on and on to 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, you've got neighbors, not being respectful of the other neighbors. So, but I'll go back and I'll put this in form of a motion. I'll make a motion to approve what we have here. It's not perfect. I stated that earlier. And we're going to come across things that we're going to have to tweak and change. And we'll have to do those, no doubt. With any ordinance that we've ever done, we've had to come back and tweak because things will arise. So I think we have something in black and white that's even above a starter point. So I think we're got some really good regulations right here, but we will have to come back and make some changes, and I understand that.
Motion to approve and a second. Any other discussion?
Yeah, Gary, based on what you said, you've been to some events that had in the contract that we shut down at a certain time. So that's an ordinance, right? I mean, somebody has agreed that that is the limit time of operation. But we're not doing that. This document does not have that in there. So you either need to put teeth in it or we not need to approve it.
Well, what I'm saying is the different event owners or whatever, with whether they're in Davidson County or Wilson County or Rutherford County or whatever county, you know, they've taken it upon themselves that this is their expertise or professionalism that they do. Now, did the county make them do that? They didn't make them do that. But they sold it to the planning commission to get approved. Okay, this is our hours of operation. Okay, well, they've put their hours of operation in a contract where once you sign, this is how, here's your expense addendum, this is what you're going to be charged for the DJ, for the cake, for the whatever, and there you are. So when it comes 10 o'clock and the DJ stops, that's when he was supposed to stop. Or the event manager or the owner of the company there or facility, bed and breakfast, whatever, they're saying, hey, your time's up. Party's over, kind of, you know, and you hate to do that, but that's the way it is. And that's how you do good business with neighbors and work with neighbors. They know the rules and regulations of where you're supposed to be doing business because they're living beside you and they're saying, okay, we'll approve you doing that because this is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to perform your business. And when it goes past that, that's when you have a problem.
And I think their case may be more the rule than the exception, because I don't know that these people that run these events have a time limitation on their music or their party into the night. So how do we protect people like this who the owner of that property or that event manager could care less how late the party goes? I mean, they're getting billed by however, they're making money, right? How do we protect people like them against a semi-tractor trailer?
I want to get into that, but it seems like Wilson County sued them too, so it seems like they're trying to enforce something that,
I know.
You know, something's going to happen here.
But I'm telling you the exact opposite of what you're telling me. You're talking about some people that are stand-up business people that enter a time on a contract, and I'm talking about people that could care less. And I'm afraid there's more of those kind of people out there that will take advantage of anything to make the money. So I'm concerned about the noise more than anything else. Their driveway issue is probably a rarity because they're actually cutting through their property to get to it, and that legally can stop. But the noise is what's always bothered me. And I'm like you. I came here tonight thinking, okay, this looks pretty good. We've been at this 4 or 5 meetings. I'm good to vote. But these are all good discussions, and I'm really concerned about the lack of limitation of a noise level or music beyond a certain point. If they're getting rocked, if their windows are shaking at 11 o'clock at night, that's no good. Do you cut it off at 6? Well, that's better, but I think we either have to decide on a time frame and make that part of the motion, or we got to keep fine-tuning this thing. I don't know.
If I could, just to make, I know there's a motion on the floor in a second, and I'm not trying to speak out of turn, but I hear there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of discomfort, I think, on the commission's part at this point with what we have. I agree with Mr. Sandlin that it's not a perfect ordinance. It would be nice to have something on the books, but I want to try to get it as close to right as we can the first time, because I don't want to have to start bringing amendments back here within 2 to 3 months because we missed something we should have considered on the front end. If you guys, it's up to you. If you want to pass it, move it forward, that's fine. I would caution, though, that if we're going to start making a lot of changes to it, I just as soon bring it back to the day meeting. Let's hash it out some more and then bring it back next month. I really don't want to wait another month, but in lieu of the discussion we're having tonight, it might be the best course of action.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry, Jim. Some of the issues that we're bringing up, they're going to be different depending on the facility and the size of the facility and what type of meeting that they're going to have. It would almost be impossible to put a particular standard that would fit anything and everything. I don't think that that is possible, because it may not be a wedding. It may be something else, a graduation party, okay? So those type of things, you can't regulate one particular business for different types of events. Doug and the staff have listened to us and some of our comments for months now. And some of these things are generic, and I know that they are, but they're in there, such as give us what it is, when it's going to be, and what type of a celebration or a wedding or whatever else it is. So it has some things in there for us to police. Commissioner Sandlin kind of hit it right on the head as far as I was concerned. The policing is actually usually done by neighbors. And if any of you have followed the news the last couple of months, the last few months, and I think you have, you're not ever without being in view of somebody or something. And how much more policing can you get than that? If someone's over there blasting away and I'm the neighbor, I'm going to film it and I'm going to bring it down here. And it's in violation of what we're doing. So we can take some corrective measurements with that owner at that particular point in time. This whole deal is something that I know is a little frustrating, but as we grow bigger and bigger and bigger, there are some events, just like Mr. Hamby over there, that has a very small facility, and it may be okay for some small events, and I really do mean small events, but if he gets a 300-person wedding in there, it's not okay. It's way too small for parking and restroom facilities and everything else. As much as he wants to have and accommodate a church member, it's probably not appropriate for something big like that. But if he wants to do a Boy Scout meeting or a retreat for his business where he's got a dozen people or so in there, those type of things to me would be perfect. But to make sure that certain things are in place, such as parking and utilities and the sanitation end of it, is something that this body, I think, is required to do. That's our job, is to provide this type of guidance for this. And I don't know if we'll ever get it right, Mike or Jim. I just don't know if we can ever get it 100% nailed down, because in my mind, I get confused about what this thing could be used for. We talk about weddings, and weddings are kind of cool, but there are some other things that's going to happen besides weddings, and they could really get annoying at times, especially to some neighbors. And I think people have a certain right to do whatever it is they want to do with their property. It's their property. But there's also property rights of those that are around them too. And I think that's what you're talking about, is that concern for those property rights. So we've got a double-edged sword that we're looking with and dealing with, and I don't know that we can ever nail it down, but I do think that we need to put something in place, and then if it doesn't work out, we can make some adjustments to it. And I'd just commend this body and the staff both for where we've come over the last 4, 5, or 6 months and all the questions that we've asked. And if we need to go back and do it, let's do that without making some decisions or issues tonight and creating more issues. And I would imagine if we pass it and it goes before the county commission, there's going to be a lot of questions at the county commission about some of the things that we've talked about, and it's going to be kind of hard to explain it to that group too. So it might take a little bit of explanation to get through the county commission. So if you guys really feel comfortable in us taking it back and doing some more study, then maybe that's what we ought to do versus passing something that some of us have some genuine concern about. that noise level, I don't know what to do about it, you know, I don't. There are some weddings that probably would get really rowdy, and then there are some weddings that are, in my mind, very religious in their approach to things, and they wouldn't be rowdy at all. So one weekend you might have one, and then next weekend you may have another, and you'd have some neighbors celebrating, and then the next weekend you'd have the same neighbors complaining. So it's not going to be a road without a few bumps in it along the way. It's just not going to be that.
I just have one question. You know, imposing the curfew of the amplification, would that not address a big portion of what the noise is? I mean, yes, people are still going to be out there laughing and talking and whatever, but I mean, the amplification is the issue, right? I mean,
Based on what we're hearing, I think that goes a long way to address some of those concerns, yes.
if we put in a curfew of whatever the number is, 10 p.m., 11 p.m., whatever, you know, this body feels, I mean, I would feel good about that, because that too gives us some teeth to say that's too much. You know, this is okay with, you know, this ordinance, and what you want to do goes beyond that.
Doug, as it stands now, if I come in with my application and I tell you, I answer all these questions, I give you my hours of operation, and I tell you about my sound amplification, do you say yay or nay on any of those, or do you carry it to the BZA just like that, and the BZA ups or downs?
We would carry it to either the BZA or the Planning Commission, Board of Commissioners, depending on which route it goes. I wouldn't.
Most of these are going to go BZA.
What's that?
Most of these are going to go BZA.
If they're under if they're 30 or under, yes. If they're over 30, they would come to you first. But I mean, to answer your question, if they're listing all that, I present that to the board. This is what they're asking for. I mean, we may present a recommendation like we normally do as staff. You know, we recommend approval of the application, however, based on these conditions or something like that. It's probably what we would do. But I mean, the quick answer to your question is yes, we would just bring it to the board with what they're asking for.
So unless we make a decision of the curfew, and we make a decision on hours of operation, and we make a decision on sound application, it's left up to the BZA.
That's correct. Whatever's in their application would be what is binding.
I recognize the need for this retreat ordinance, and we really do need that type business. And I'm glad we're going to look closer at the noise and the hours of operation. But I still have a problem with an 11,000 square foot facility on a 5-acre lot. If you do this building, which is going to be one story, and parking, you've taken up every bit of the property. And that means you're essentially right at your neighbor's doorstep. And if you've got an 11,000 square foot building with the stereo going inside of it, it's going to have to be loud, and it's going to come outside that building, and the neighbors are going to hear it. I'm thinking maybe 1%'s more reasonable. That would allow somebody about a 2,200 square foot building on a 5-acre lot. If they want to buy a 200-acre piece of property, then they can have a larger building. But I just don't think that this should be that crowded in there. This is supposed to be a rural type setting. We're not supposed to pave the whole 5 acres and build a huge commercial metal building on it.
Tim, I understand what you're saying, but correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, but your buffering back here, your 100 foot, 75 and 50 foot on your acreage, that's going to take down your size of building compared to your scenario right there.
Well, to an extent, I think that you're right to an extent. Let me flip open to that. I mean, the setback, you're correct. Depending on the type of buffer, I mean, the minimum buffer you're going to have is 50 feet. Now, on a 5-acre tract, if you've got 50 feet along all sides, I mean, that's going to take some area out. Now, I don't have a example here I can show you, say just exactly how much it is. We have had that in the past. I just don't have them out today.
Yeah.
But I mean, there is some credence to that. If they're not going to provide as big of a buffer, they're going to have higher setbacks, which means it's going to limit where they can put their buildings.
Going to do something with your square footage.
I mean, just because, right? I mean, and I understand, you know, Mr. Everwater's point. I mean, I do. You know, just because you may be allowed to have 5%, again, after you look at the setbacks, you may not be able to get it and still meet the setbacks. So, I mean, they kind of work in conjunction with each other in that sense.
Overall shape of the property will determine that at that
There's
point.
that too. I mean, a lot of the examples.
On these smaller pieces, if it's rectangular.
Correct.
2-to-1 ratio, side, from the long side to the short side, then.
And, the examples
May
we
well
showed
be
you.
right. It may well cut the building size
Right. The
back.
examples we showed you before were really on, non-awkwardly shaped parcels. They're pretty much, like you said, squared, rectangle, something like that. You start getting some of those parcels out in the county. I mean, some of them are irregularly shaped, and the setbacks at that point are really going to limit where you can put something. So that's another situation to consider.
We've got a motion, we've got a second. If we're ready to vote, we'll vote. If there is a majority that, or a big number of us that feel like we need more discussion, we probably need to do that just so we can get this thing right, as Doug has said, and I just don't want the thing to be a concern, because if we're not pretty much in one accord and it goes before the county commission, it's going to have a lot of strife at the county commission getting passed too. So I'd rather see us make sure we're real comfortable with it, and I keep thinking pretty much every time we meet we've got it, but then something else always comes up, and that's not bad. That's really doing your job. Steve?
Mr. Chairman, I would entertain an amendment on either one of y'all's part. Chime in here and tell us what your thoughts are on that hours of operation or amplification, on the sound, and we can incorporate that in there. And Mr. Averard, if you've got a suggestion there on that square footage there, difference. We'll get it out here and see if we can. I don't want to just pull something out of the air, but I mean.
I'd ask to withdraw it till the next meeting, let staff fine tune it a little bit and make sure that we've got it, just defer the vote on it, is what I'd ask. But we'd have to turn it down today if we didn't, we'd have to vote on it, turn it down, or maybe turn it down.
Well, I want staff to have some direction too. I don't want to just turn it down or not do anything, and y'all, what are we going to do here for the next 30 days, so.
Well, based on the conversations I've heard, and these seem to be the biggest topics, the amplification and perhaps a limit to the amplification of music or sound just in general, the hours of operation, maybe getting a little more specific with that than we were originally proposing, and then dealing with the size of the structures. Those seem to be the big three that I've heard. Now, if there's others, let me know. We can go ahead and address those too, but those are the big three that I heard.
With those, we've got a couple members out. I'm going to withdraw my motion. Let's move it, see if y'all do a little more work on it, kind of get it tightened up here, and then our morning meeting, maybe we have full board here, and we'll be ready to go with it.
We can have some recommendations at that point.
Okay.
Motion has been withdrawn, and a motion for the staff to do some more tweaking and bring it back to the commission would be in order.
Right, but to Mr. Sandlin's question, as far as the amplification and Rhonda's concern, my concern, it's a nuisance application or a nuisance amplification that I'm concerned about. Only if the levels are at nuisance level is where I'm really concerned about a time cutoff, okay? If the harpist wants to play till 2 in the morning and only people that can hear it are the people in a 20-foot radius, I'm cool with that. It's just the nuisance portion. So let me throw out 10 p.m. as maybe just a place to start, okay? And at before our next, or during our next meeting, I have a question that maybe Josh can answer now, but if not, I'm doing some homework, Doug. What is the financial penalty for if I get issued a nuisance ordinance? What is my fine? I mean, if it's $50, then why do I care? I'll just factor that into my cost of my party, and I'll blast it every night, 365 days a week. So, and is there a 3 strikes you're out rule for a nuisance? I mean, how many do you have to have before somebody can say, that's enough, we're shutting you down?
Or could we have if there is a $50 fine, could there be
$5,000 fine.
A gradually increasing fine then? If you do it every weekend, yeah, it's going to get a little steeper every time.
The minimal amount of dollars, I'm going to violate that every time if I'm running a business.
Gosh, stop us.
Yeah, I can partially respond to that. It is a $50 fine. I don't know if you were just being facetious about that or but you got it right. So the rule is, and it kind of depends on what you're talking about in terms of nuisance, and because these are all loaded terms. So you can have you could have civil nuisance, which is maybe what it sounds like this lawsuit back here is in part about. So you can sue your neighbor for nuisance, and that's a civil lawsuit. And to the extent you can prove damages in the civil lawsuit, you could recover whatever amount of damage you could prove, be it $50 or $500,000, theoretically. In terms of there being a regulation, a zoning regulation, let's say that someone's violating, then the codes department cites them. Those are generally taken to General Sessions Court. General Sessions judge typically only has the authority to fine $50 because a General Sessions Court cannot seat a jury. And there's old law that basically says in order to have a criminal penalty that exceeds $50, you've got to have a jury involved. So ordinarily, where it can get a little complicated is it one event? Because I think there is some law that would suggest you could have a $50 fine per violation, and then you can get into that. Once the codes department's brought them in, is it a singular event that they're citing them for that happened over a 2-week time span, or is that every night for 2 weeks? And that kind of gets a little bit gray. The other thing, though, that a court can do, a court can abate a nuisance. So, in theory, if you have some ongoing nuisance, a judge could stop it, could order it stopped, and then if the person continued with what had been violating what had been ordered, they'd be in contempt of court. And then in theory, finally, I guess the last component, or maybe this is what Wilson County did, in theory, a county can sue a landowner who's in violation of a zoning ordinance. And I don't mean the codes department taking them to General Sessions Court. I mean the county suing them to abate the violation. And that can happen. That's a complicated process because you have to first ask the question, who has the authority on behalf of the county to authorize the lawsuit? So usually you wind up having to get county commission approval to initiate a lawsuit like that, and that is not always that's complicated. Let me just say it that way. Does that answer your question?
All it does is enforce my concerns.
What are you going to do, Mike?
I think my offer still stands. I would throw out a 10 o'clock nuisance amplification stoppage. And, well, you know what? Here's my thing with that. If they want to have a party and dance, then rent a club. Don't go out in somebody's farm and bother the neighbors with loud music. A wedding and a church thing and a Boy Scout deal is one thing. But if you want to really party, then rent out the Parthenon or rent out dueling pianos, whatever you want to do. But don't take it and bother your neighbors. So I'm sticking at 10 o'clock. And I think
we talked about some of those things early on, if you guys will remember, about Bonnaroo, okay? Could we be approving something like that? And some of the things that we put in place would not allow something like that. But I can understand. So what we're looking at now is time, a nuisance ordinance that relates to noise or amplification.
I'm suggesting a start time at 6 and a stopping at 10. And that's just my suggestion, and that we can debate that.
Or the amplification, 6 to 10?
Amplification.
Okay.
Party till 4 in the morning if they want, as long as they're quiet.
All right.
Jim, let's see, there was something else, square footage, right? Square footage.
I've got that down. Yes, sir.
Is there anything else that kind of comes to our mind?
Jim, you want to drop it down, the percentage down further, or what are you thinking there? I'm just trying to help give them direction, because
I thought on a 5-acre lot, a 2,200 square foot facility is reasonable, and a 200-acre lot, then maybe 20,000 square foot is reasonable. So I suppose that would put it about the 1%.
Let staff come up with like a chart. We can come up with a chart and say this is what it would be at 5, 2.5%, 1% at 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 acres. That'll give you an idea, I think. Let's do that.
Doug, this doesn't need to be in the ordinance, but just for my own information, I'd like to know, on bullet point C, you've got parcels must have an unobstructed frontage along a public road consistent with the zoning ordinance. I'd like to know, depending on which zone they're going to be in, what that frontage is.
Well, the minimum frontage along really any road is 50 foot.
Okay.
I mean, now the width is not measured at the property line. It's measured at the setback line. That's where we measure lot width, so that's a little bit different. But the requirement in the zoning ordinance is lots have to have a minimum of 50 feet. Unless you're on a cul-de-sac, you can go down just a little bit, like 40 feet. But outside of that, it doesn't matter if you've got 5 acres or 500. You have a minimum of 50 feet.
Okay. That was part of what I was concerned about. I didn't want it to be smaller than 50.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
After kind of reviewing this thing a little bit further in your leisure time, spare time, any other things that pop into your mind, just call Doug and the staff and
please
share that with them, and we can discuss that further as well. Let me once again thank this commission for all of your input as we go forward with this. But let me also thank Mr. Hamby and Mr. and Mrs. Lanham for being in here, because your being here tonight kind of led to this discussion, and what we put in place eventually will be a better document with your input. So thank you very much for your input in this public hearing tonight. So with that, Doug, I'm not sure if you want to bring it back in 2 weeks. You think that'll be plenty of time?
I think we should have enough time. I mean, the issues that are brought up, I think if it doesn't work out, it doesn't, but hopefully we'll be able to do that.
That leads us to our next scheduled meeting, which is 9 a.m. on April the 27th, and that'll be in the planning building in the mezzanine area in the planning building. One other thing you've got in front of you, I hope you've got in front of you the Building Codes Department report, once again for your reading pleasure. David couldn't be here tonight, or
he asked me to pass it out.
Staff reports, other business?
Well, nothing really to report. I will say that we were scheduled to have a training session after this meeting. I don't think anyone in here anticipated this meeting was going to last this long. Our speaker is here. He did drive from Nashville to address you with the topic at hand. He is, and if you see me looking at my phone, that was why I was texting back and forth with him. He said it's okay with him if you guys would prefer to reschedule. It's after 7:30 now. If you want to go ahead, he'll do a shorter version. It's really up to the commission and how you want to go. If you want, we can just go ahead and adjourn to the mezzanine with our training session, and we'll just go with whatever it is. He's just concerned that after a longer meeting that you'd be in the mood to listen to some more information on that. So I'll leave it up to you. He's flexible either way.
Input.
We were going to do a presentation on planning and public health. I believe you had mentioned, or somebody had mentioned, looking at, recent trends and planning. Michael Skipper from the Metropolitan Planning Organization, MPO, out of Nashville. They've done a lot of good research out there, and I'm on the technical coordinating committee for that board, and we've heard some presentations from their staff on that. He was going to kind of give an overview of that.
Let me just put it like this. I would, as chairman, I would prefer that we postpone. Thank you.
We'll try to reschedule that at a future time.
Anything else, Doug?
Sorry, I've got nothing else.
Once again, thank you for your participation tonight. Any other questions or comments? We're adjourned.